Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I want to give just another few seconds for people to hop on. We still have folks joining at this moment. Hope it's nice and sunny where some of you are. It is downright pouring here in Maine, at least in central Maine.
The rain has passed for Portland right now,
Oh,
but I think it's going to come back.
yes. Great. We'll go ahead and get started. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us at your lunch break or noon on a Thursday. Here for our Charging to Backup EVs as a Dual Purpose Power Systems webinar. My name's Caitlin. I'm one of the co-owners at Revision. And before I hand it over to Thomas and Chuck, just a few housekeeping notes. As Chuck and Thomas go through the presentation, please feel free to add questions in the chat or use the Q&A feature. I will hold the questions until the end of the presentation and we can answer them during the end, the Q&A portion. If we don't get to your question or you want to talk about your specific situation, I'll add contact information in the chat and you can reach out to us that way. Now it's my pleasure to present Thomas Tudor, our main sales manager, and Chuck Hayward, our EV infrastructure designer and analyst.
Thanks a lot, Caitlin. Excited to be here. Thanks for tuning in. Glad to have Chuck's expertise with us today. And I'll kick us off and then turn it over to Chuck. So quickly, the agenda. We're going to get into a little solar and battery basics. And then what about EV batteries? I hear those are pretty big and there's more and more of them. I actually heard a great stat this morning on a podcast that in 2025 globally, the electric demand of electric vehicles was actually roughly twice as much as the increase in data center demand. So as much as we're hearing about that globally, EVs are adding more load than data centers in 2025. So we're going to talk a bunch about EVs and all the things that they can do with their batteries, and then also about home batteries and the benefits of having a stationary battery always connected in your home, especially when you have solar and a new efficiency main program that incentivizes using your home battery to support the grid, and round it out with a reminder about sort of the benefits of solar and batteries and try to get into some questions at the end. Chuck and I have a bunch of good slides that we've prepared and looking forward to this, and we'll probably move pretty quickly to get through a lot of content. So please type those questions in and we'll try to get to them at the end. Quickly, background on Revision. We've been around since 2003, started up in Mid-Coast, Maine. I grew up on Islesboro, where self-sufficiency and resiliency kind of part of island life. And my aunt and uncle live in Liberty, where Revision began. And we've expanded now to 2 locations in Maine, 2 in New Hampshire, and 2 in Massachusetts. I'm super proud to be working with over 400 employee owners. We became a 100% ESOP employee-owned company in 2017 and have been a certified B Corp for longer than that. And we're really on a mission to build our just and equitable electric future. And so far, that has meant over 20,000 projects we've built in New England, offsetting 140,000 tons of carbon every year and saving our customers over 70 million bucks in annual energy bills. I like to sort of level set here, especially we're talking a bunch about batteries, that there are different types of solar and battery systems. One here is off-grid, which is solar and battery, or just anything that is not connected to grid power. So you're independent from the utility, but usually you require fossil fuels if you're going to be using significant amounts of electricity. So either the fossil fuels are running a generator or heating your home or providing hot water. if you're really talking about a home power system. Then we get into grid tied, which solar grid tied systems are the vast majority of solar systems out there right now. There is no battery, but you're connected to the grid. So you can run heat pumps, you can charge an electric vehicle, you can run your house all on electricity, and you can make that electricity yourself with solar and use the grid as your battery essentially. Grid tied with battery backup, you sort of get the best of both worlds where you've got the same system for electrifying your home and producing that power yourself, but you also have a battery that can run your home during outages, have your own microgrid. And then this new efficiency main program, you can also enroll in this VPP virtual power plant program and share your battery resources with the grid, and get paid for the value that you're providing there. Electric vehicles can integrate into sort of all of these scenarios in different ways, and Chuck is about to get into those details. Um, and just sort of a basic reminder on the benefits of having a battery at your house. You can protect your pipes, save your food, stay connected to the internet, keep water flowing, power what matters, your heating, appliances, lights, etc. Um, and with that, I think everybody's really here to learn about the creativity and fun solutions that electric vehicles provide. So I'll turn it over to Chuck and we'll come back to the home battery system later.
Cool. Thank you, Thomas. Um, as I said, I'm an EV infrastructure designer here, which means that I work on all of our commercial EV projects, and I do a lot of talks and events related to EVs. And everybody always asks me, it's got this giant battery. Can I use it to power my house? So that's what we're going to cover here. Um, Been a topic a lot of people are interested, but kind of just EV drivers mainly. And then in February, if you remember back that far, and the Super Bowl caught my eye when Bad Bunny was performing, and there was this one of these scenes you see here that featured exploding, sparking transformers and utility poles and the dancers up there and everything. It really brought to the forefront how important energy is to our lives. The Puerto Rico grid is kind of overloaded sometimes and has lots of blackouts, and that is it's so important to the people of Puerto Rico that obviously Bad Bunny chose to include it in the Super Bowl halftime show, which is a pretty powerful statement about just how central energy is to our lives. And then a couple months later, when we invaded Iran and attacked Iran there, not invaded, attacked. Um, and the Strait of Hormuz shut down, that really brought that to people's attention just to how our entire energy system is kind of pretty fragile in ways that we don't always pay attention to when something like this can shut it down. So part of what Revision does is this electrified home, right? This idea that as you electrify, you really can gain independence from unreliable grid, volatility of fossil fuels, pricing, and things like that. And that's this combination of all these technologies: solar panels, heat pumps, electric water heating, electric cars, and battery storage. So I'm going to focus kind of on those two in the lower right today, which is the electric cars and the battery storage there. So we're going to talk about some of the ways that you can use backup batteries and how EVs can serve in those capacities. So let's just start basically with the idea of backup batteries, whether that's an EV or another option. The easiest way to think about them, I think, is that a backup battery is basically just like a generator. It just happens to use battery power instead of burning a fuel. Um, that means they can either be portable, like the one you see on the left there, or there are built-in options. These two are both by a company called EcoFlow. They happen to offer both, so I figured I'd show the two options they have there. So if we can go on to the next one there. Portable ones, just like a generator, they can go through a transfer switch. I'm sure many people in Maine are familiar with this since, we tend to lose power up here, and a lot of people already have transfer switches in their home. That's like the one you see on the left there. When the power goes out, you just flip those circuits, the switches at the top to flip those circuits from grid power over to the generator power, and you get, some power in your home. So a portable one can go in through that, or you have built-in options like this revision installation here. Those two white boxes in the lower right there. Those are two Franklin built-in batteries. And then you see the associated equipment, which actually has kind of the same transfer switch and everything mounted on the wall there, along with the other electrical equipment. So, but unlike generators, there are some advantages you get with batteries, right, that make them kind of better than generators in a lot of ways. There's no pull starts. You're not worried about that. They just, in some cases, you don't have to do anything. In other cases, you just kind of press a button to turn that battery on and it's good to go. You don't have to worry about refilling, especially when the weather's bad and you lose power. That's a nice perk. And then from a safety and comfort perspective, the exhaust from a generator can be deadly, unfortunately, in some senses. You don't have to worry about that with batteries. There is no exhaust. And then if you've ever been to a campground or you have a neighbor that has a generator, you know how noisy they can be. So uh, battery backup is silent, which is really great. And that is probably my favorite thing about it. I've had lots of camping trips ruined by somebody running a loud generator at the site next to you. Um, so what are the other advantages of backup batteries? Compared to generators, they provide those same things, what we just saw some, but the main thing right there for emergency power. But unlike generators, they offer some additional things that you can't do with a generator. You can use those, whether that's shifting when your load happens from the battery and using a time of use rate. There are demand response initiative incentives that are available through Efficiency Main. Thomas is going to talk about those a bit at the end. And then the other really nice thing is that with a battery, you can actually do what's called islanding your solar. You can take it off from the grid and you can continue to use your solar and produce solar even when the grid is down, which is a really nice feature. Um, so like generators, batteries, if you're using battery backup, there are different options and you size them based on what you need to power and how long you need to power it for. So we'll go into some of those if you can advance to the next one. Thank you. So going back to this revision example here of the Franklin batteries that we installed, this is a 10 kilowatt battery. That's the power it actually provides. If you're familiar with generators, they're also rated in kilowatts, and that's going to depend how much you need to power at the time, how large of a battery or generator you need. The next number there, 15 kilowatt hours, that's kind of, and the equivalent of a fuel generator, that would be like the size of the tank, right? How long can it last before it needs to be refilled, essentially? So in this example, you put those together. If you were running at full capacity, this would last about an hour and a half, just to put some numbers on there and help kind of make sense of what those are. Often doesn't run at full capacity, but that puts it on there. Okay, so that's batteries in general. Again, EVs are giant batteries with the wheels on them, but basically they're a giant battery. So uh, just I'm going to use this diagram to kind of talk about these different options, but just to kind of level set, this is how charging works, right? You've got the grid, the house component, you've got a charger, and then you've got the vehicle. Usually energy flows from the grid to the panel in your house that feeds your charger, which then charges your vehicle, right? Um, However, with electric vehicles, we can kind of reverse that in some ways. So this, you may have heard of a feature called vehicle to load. And essentially this means this is the equivalent of like a portable generator, right? You can use that battery to power loads. You can plug them into the car, right? So I've got a list here: coffee maker, popcorn maker, air pump, induction plate, electric grill, saw, computer, vacuum. Not a random list. Those are all things that I have powered off of my car, which is pretty cool. So here's an example. I have a car that has this vehicle to load capability. You can see a little adapter that goes in the charge port there. And this is an electric grill that I have that I use for camping. I use it at home all the time, but I can take it with me when I'm camping and power it off of the car, which is pretty cool, to be able to make grilled foods and not have to worry about charcoal or lighter fluid or, fire risk and things like that. So that's one example of vehicle to load. That picture on the left, that's the adapter I have. Notice it's just one outlet. My car doesn't do a ton of output, but it's enough to power a grill at least. Whereas the next two pictures on the right there and in the center, those are the outlets in a Ford Lightning, an electric truck. You notice there's a lot more capability there. And then in the one in the center, there's actually a high power outlet that you may be familiar with if you have a generator. Cool things you can do with that. This is actually our 20th anniversary celebration we had in 2023. So a couple years ago, we had an entire live band with lights, fog machines, amps, the soundboard, all of it completely powered off grid by Ford Lightnings that revision has. So just one of the really cool uses of that kind of portable generator use. I really like this for like food trucks. You think about going to a food truck party and there's just constant generators running and that noise. Imagine how pleasant that would be to run them off of silent electric trucks instead of just generators chugging away the whole time. So lots of cool potentials for that. So because it can act as a portable generator, just like portable generators, that load can actually be a lot of things in your house. So we're going to talk about how do you get electric power from your electric vehicle back to the house, right? So there's a couple ways to do this. One way, the simple way, as many people are familiar with a portable generator, is you run a bunch of extension cords through the window. Um, this was after I bought my car. We got a nice big snowstorm, as you can see there. I believe it was mid-April, as you would expect it may. Knocked out power for a day and a half, and we wanted to make sure the fridge could still run. So we ran extension cord from the car through the window, powered the fridge, and we were good to go for 36 hours while we didn't have power. Plugged in the coffee maker when we needed it, plugged in the toaster, kept things going. So just like some people use a generator in the same way where they're just kind of running extension cords in an emergency. You can do the same thing and use some electric vehicles. They have to have the capability to serve that same purpose. So that's the simple way. The next one, which just gets a little more complicated, as you can use a transfer switch. Again, people do this with their portable generators. In some cases, you can do this with electric vehicles too. And that load can actually be a lot of your house when you run it through a transfer switch that goes to your house. So going to the picture that I shared earlier of the transfer switch, which I think should be the next slide there. Oh, maybe not. But yeah, that one. Thank you. So this is an example of a transfer switch that can actually be powered. I can plug into this and use batteries to power that. If you notice, like there's a little yellow tape on the breakers on the right, all of those circuits are actually run through the battery. So you can see that it's actually a lot of the house. It won't run the heat pump panel. It won't run um, the electric stove, the dryer, but lighting and plugs and things like that. Um, will all run off of that. So if you can go back to that one with the cars, thank you. Um, so like I said earlier, just thinking about the sizes you need. So we went through those numbers with the Franklin. Um, Electric cars, kind of in comparison, you'll get various capabilities. So the Ionic 5 at the top there, that's what I have. It's 1.8 kilowatts, much less than you would get from things you can power simultaneously. However, the capacity, the size of that tank is a whole lot larger. So I can't power as much, but I can do it for 35 hours with that car. And then you see some other two examples there with those electric trucks. They have the same output power roughly as the Franklin, much bigger batteries, so they can last quite a bit longer. However, there's some limitations to that system too, just using an EV instead, and we'll get into that in a little bit too. Thanks. So vehicle to load, on the plus side, it's not super complicated. It can be as simple as extension cords in a pinch, or you can kind of have a more complex system that has a transfer switch and can do that. Relatively inexpensive to install a transfer switch, and much easier and more pleasant to use compared to a generator. On the kind of negative side, you can only back up what's on the transfer switch. You can't power the whole house. Same is probably true for smaller portable generators too. And it only works while the vehicle is plugged in at home. So that's one thing to consider. That setup was great until you've got to go to work or whatever, and then if someone's left at home, they've got no power right when the vehicle's gone. The other thing to consider is that the output can be kind of limited dependent on the EV, and it usually only powers 120-volt loads. So you can't power like a well pump, for example, which is the challenge that I have at home since I'm on well water. Except for electric trucks. A lot of the electric trucks can power more. So that brings us to the next one, which is this idea of it's called vehicle to home. So you'll see like V2L means vehicle to load. That's what we just talked about. More complex here, vehicle to home. This is like having a built-in generator. It's going to go through a transfer switch and more. As you see, I put that in big text there because that's one of the important things here, as you'll see on this next picture. Thank you. This is the Ford system that Ford came out with, the Ford Lightning, where they have actual vehicle to home capability. So what you'll notice from this picture is there's a lot of equipment here, right? You need an inverter, you need a transfer switch, the equivalent of a transfer switch, you need a protected loads panel. You got to have a lot of room for this. Not even, also you need the charger, as you can see there. Um, The other thing I think that's worth mentioning, notice the large Ford logo on the charger and then the other inverter type piece in the middle there. Um, these are very manufacturer specific. So this system will only work with a Ford Lightning. Um, which, if you want to buy that one brand forever, maybe that's not a problem for you. But the other thing to think about is like if they discontinue that system as Ford actually has now, it's, you're kind of stuck, right? It's not super flexible. So this is a system that some people use, but it does have its downsides. So the good thing about these systems is that they can have really high output and they can basically power everything in your house. They can work automatically. So as long as the vehicle is plugged in, if you lose grid power, this will just turn on. It's like, you won't even notice, just like if you have an automatic generator. On the downside, they're complex. As you can see, it's definitely a professional install. They're expensive systems. They take up lots of room for all this equipment. Again, you can only back up what's on the switch or, through this system. So not every single load, but a lot of them. Um, Big downside of this one too, obviously only works when the vehicle is plugged in and you're at home, which is great until somebody needs to take that vehicle and whoever's left at home has nothing anymore, right? Um, so it's a lot to invest in a system that doesn't always get you what you want. And as I was going through, that does lock you into a specific manufacturer, which is a concern for some people. Okay, so we've covered vehicle to load, vehicle to home. It is not available on every single electric vehicle. I think that's one of the things that, a lot of people get really excited about this. So like, oh, any vehicle has a battery, I should be able to do this. It requires extra equipment. You need an inverter for one to get that DC power of the battery to AC power for the grid, and not every car has that built in. The column on the left here that you see all the check marks, those are vehicles that have that vehicle to load capability where they can output power, like I just showed with my car, where it's just a little adapter or it's got some plugs in the bed. Hyundai and Kia and Genesis, a few of their models can do that. The electric trucks from Ford, GM, Rivian, and then some SUVs like the Volvo EX90, the Lucid Gravity, and Tesla will do it if you get a 2026 Model Y performance. So very specific, right? So you got to be really careful on which EV you want to do this with right now. On the right, those are systems that have vehicle to home. So Hyundai, Kia, they have a system. Ford had a system, they've discontinued it. Tesla has their system that works with the Cybertruck. So any of these manufacturers kind of has their own system. And I put a few asterisks there. I don't know how to make that word plural next to a few of those because those are announced systems um, that have that. Um, and I think there may be others that I'm missing. I'm not sure, but I've tried to be as comprehensive as I can. But there's a lot of specifics here, so you need to be careful with both the car and the system to make sure that they pair with what's there. So that's the general overview. So those systems are great, but there are some downsides with those, right? So really, if you're looking for independence and true backup that works wherever, the way you really achieve that is with an electrified home, right? And by that, I mean a home that has solar and a battery. In particular, a built-in battery gives you a lot more flexibility than using the EV. And we'll talk about how you compare those even to get kind of the advantages of both. But what this does, it means that, depending on how much space you have on your roof or to make your solar, you can last almost indefinitely with just solar, depending on how everything's sized and what you're using. If the grid goes down for an extended period, that solar is going to recharge your built-in battery, and you can get through a very long outage, depending on how everything's sized. If you've got a built-in battery, you don't have to worry about the vehicle not being there, right? If you need to go to the store, you need to go to work, you got to do something still, even though you don't have power. You still have backup power even without the vehicle there, which is pretty nice. And then you're not locked into a specific manufacturer. If you buy a certain EV and you decide you want a smaller one, different manufacturer, whatever, right? That built-in battery is still going to work and provide that backup power, even if you switch vehicles, which is a really nice feature. By doing this is what can lead you to true energy independence. Once you've got the solar, you're insulated from those rate hikes, utility rate hikes if you're producing your own power. If you've got an EV that you can charge at home, you're not worried about the cost of fossil fuels and what can happen to gas prices, based on politics and everything that's going on around the world. So that really can provide a pretty that true energy independence that I think motivates a lot of people, and they're looking to get there. Couple more benefits, or something to think about here. Sorry, no, you're good. Go ahead. Thank you. Um, while that is like the where people want to go, that can be like your goal to get there. It's important to remember you don't have to do everything all at once. When I've done this presentation, I like this slide. I also like wrestle with, should I really show batteries being recharged by a generator? But I think it highlights the point that you don't have to implement every single system at once. You can start with one and then kind of expand the system as you're able to over time. So I think this does two things. It highlights that nicely, but it also shows you that this Franklin system does have the availability to pair it with this generator input that you see in the middle there at the bottom. Um, so that if you don't have solar or your solar can't quite keep up with your needs for an extended outage, you can plug in a generator there. And certain EVs, you can actually plug into that and basically really extend the capacity that Franklin, some of those electric trucks are like 10 to 15 times as large as the Franklin in terms of capacity. So if you get the right setup, you can plug in some EVs into that and make that battery system that much last that much longer, which is pretty nice. Um, so the other nice thing to think about, if you have a built-in battery, if you add that, it's a lot cheaper to run than a generator. And because of this combination of both energy savings and incentive programs and different things you can do with it, it can actually pay off itself in less than 10 years. Every situation is going to be a little different, but the long-term cost of a generator versus a battery is actually a lot less with a built-in battery. Um, if you're looking at solar, tax credits are also still available through new leasing options. So that's, I think, important to think about there. And then we'll get into some of these EMT incentives in a bit. But the other thing I want to mention is this idea of a transactive rate. The cost of energy at different times during the day when there's lots of solar, the grid has all this extra energy. And at night when there's not solar, we got to produce it all in more expensive sources. So there are utilities that will basically have differential pricing during the day, where you can buy cheap energy during the day and then resell it back to the grid at night when they'll pay you 4 times as much for it. We don't have that in Maine right now. I know our utilities are exploring, but if you have a built-in battery, this is something that in the future you could take advantage of. Not really possible with that EV, EV to load or EV to home, because it needs to be tied back to the grid, which you can only get through a built-in battery like that. So some other really cool options there. And again, that flexibility and long-term um, prospects are really going to be the best with a built-in battery compared to an EV. Unfortunately, as much as I like EVs. So I think that is it for me, and then we'll send it back to Thomas, and he'll talk about some incentives and additional battery topics.
Thanks a lot, Chuck. That was great. And for anybody who doesn't already follow Chuck on LinkedIn, I highly recommend it. He's always posting really good insights about EVs and the ways that he is using them to run all kinds of different electric equipment and, the travels throughout the country on electric motors. So circling back to sort of the comparison of batteries versus generators, Chuck really highlighted this always on automatic aspect of a standby battery that sits there in your garage or your basement or outside your home that's always plugged in. That is a huge benefit over an EV that is also being used for transportation and therefore isn't always going to be there. So as tempting as it is to think that an electric vehicle battery is the only battery your home needs, there's a variety of reasons why um, it makes a lot of sense to have one that is always connected to your solar array and your loads that you want to run. And as we'll get into, you can be paid for that battery's grid connection and providing its resources to the grid when needed. So bunch of different ways to back up loads and a bunch of reasons why generators are going to be a thing of the past. Of it just filled out the EV driver survey that the Natural Resources Council of Maine sends around last night. And one of the additional comments I put in there is, as a father of two young children, having the ability to turn on your EV these days, it's cooling, and keep your car comfortable while you pack your kids into it, sometimes one before the other, is really nice to have that done quietly and silently without fumes. I take ferries as well with my car, and just having it there and being able to climate control your space without burning things and all that comes with that is, I think, one of those overlooked benefits of electric vehicles. So we're gonna think more about batteries now and their value to the grid and Efficiency Maine's new program. Chuck alluded to this, but more and more as solar deployment occurs and our penetrations increase, we have surplus solar energy during the day, and we have an evening peak, which is when everybody gets home from work and starts cooking and maybe charging their car, doing other household appliance activities. And it's when solar is tailing off in its production. So in Maine now, those peaks are typically between 5 to 9 p.m. on weekdays, which is when the time of use rates are at peak, and then everywhere else is off peak. And a battery that can just shift some solar from the middle of the day to that evening peak is increasingly valuable on the grid. So Efficiency Maine has a new virtual power plant program where you are linking a bunch of home batteries together and deploying them to try to reduce that peak demand on the grid. The more your battery shares with the grid, the more you earn. So it's exciting that this program is really, there's a bunch of programs around the country. Some of them have been running for a long time, and it's really the sort of smart grid that we've been thinking about and talking about for a long time. More and more programs are coming online to encourage that, responsible use of the grid and rewarding the value of energy storage back to the grid during peak times. So Efficiency Maine's new program began in April of this year, and it rewards homeowners for sharing capacity to help build a more resilient electric grid. You need a qualifying home battery that's properly interconnected per local utility guidelines. And there are a few events per month, maximum of 60 per year, that are expected to be called on weekday evenings during that 5 to 9 p.m. window. And each of those events is 3 hours long. So when an event is called, your battery, if you're enrolled, will deploy its energy into the grid for that 3 hour period, and you get paid for your average participation over the year, which per battery is like roughly $600 per year for a 10-year program. So we're talking serious money to help offset the upfront cost of installing one of these batteries in your home. That's the biggest savings that you can receive as a homeowner with a standby battery. Time of use savings are also available if you enroll in time of use rates, and if you don't already have solar that is producing your electricity. So we do install some batteries for condo owners or others that want backup power, don't own their own roof, and can't have their own on-site solar power. And so those standalone batteries can enroll in time of use and this VPP program. And really pay for that standalone battery just in those two programs over the warranty life of the battery, and especially compared to the alternative of an upfront cost of a generator and then that ongoing cost and maintenance. It's a quite compelling time to be thinking about home battery systems. So just to wrap up the efficiency main program, you choose a qualifying battery. There's a list on Efficiency Main's website. Revision installs the Franklin and the Tesla batteries. So we will show you what those look like if you are interested. And it's an easy way to sign up right through their app. You enroll after the install. You set your preferences. The default is a 20% floor state of charge. So the VPP program will use the top 80%. You could set that floor lower and get paid more, or you could set it higher and get paid a little bit less, just providing less of your battery to be used by the grid during those peak events. And then you earn your incentive. You can opt out of any event. They're called the day before. So if for some reason you thought you wanted your full battery backup, you thought there was going to be a power outage or something in your local area, you could opt out. Though there's also these Stormwatch features, and Efficiency Main intends not to call events during expected weather events. So you're already protected there. But again, you can opt out any time from this program. So they're trying to make it as easy and flexible to use your battery only when you want it to be used. But the default is once you enroll in the program, you just keep your battery connected to the internet, keep your Wi-Fi router doing its thing, and your battery will participate automatically without you having to do anything. And so you just get paid for your battery supporting the grid. So if you already got solar and you're adding a battery, you have that backup power during grid outages, as we've talked about. You can also earn credit for the power you share with the grid. And just worth knowing, as I already mentioned, that solar already offsets your electric kilowatt hour usage and you get credits for that. So enrolling in time of use, if you also have solar, is not necessary. And yeah, you really have full control and functionality of your battery programming for state of charge and any events that you choose to opt out of in this VPP program. So yeah, great time for batteries in Maine. The thing that our customers are always trying to figure out for their home is how many batteries do I need? And it really comes down to how much energy does your home use? Would you use less during an outage? And how much does your solar produce if you have on-site solar? The reality is that with an electrified home, you are going to be using more electricity in the winter and you're producing less solar in the winter. So that is sort of the pinch point that we look at when we're sizing battery systems. I have a 1928 built Cape in Portland that I've done a bunch of insulation for, installed heat pumps for my space heating, cooling, heat pump water heater. I got solar panels on the roof, and my wife and I both have Chevy Bolts. So over a winter day, this is my, let's see if I can use my laser pointer here. Right here, this is midnight, and I'm using electricity from the grid. That's in red. At about 7:30, the sun starts hitting my panels. This blue is electricity that I produce on my roof and my home uses in real time. The green is excess solar that automatically flowed back into the grid, and I get credits for the green to work off the red. This is a particular winter day I chose because there's a very big difference in my home usage in the evening compared to the morning hours. Um, so zooming back out again, that was one day. This is 1 year. And you can see overall, my home, I made about 10,000 kilowatt hours or 10 megawatt hours on my roof. And my home consumed a little bit more than that, about 12,000 kilowatt hours over the course of the year. Um, this is month by month. And you can see starting in April, the green is higher than the red. And so April, May, June, July, August, September, October is even, but all of those months I produced more electricity than I consumed. Um, and then November, December, January, February, March, it was the opposite. Um, should be noted that this is a heat pump heated home. And so if you don't heat with electricity, this shift of much higher winter demand is significantly less dramatic, um, which makes backing your home up with batteries easier. And that's what I'll get into in just a minute. But the other piece here is that CMP outages are actually typically sort of in these shoulder seasons, like before the ground has fully frozen or after it has thawed, and we get those wet, sticky snowstorms or ice storms that cause the most tree damage. So the coldest part of the winter is actually not when we usually have the worst outages, which is a little bit counterintuitive. But we think about those winter months because that's where your solar production is least. And if you're an electrified home, your usage is the most. So back to this day example in December, this is where my wood stove, I had run the evening before and stoked up. And so I had very little heating load here and I was asleep. So all my other discretionary loads were off. The flip side is when I got home from work, I started charging electric vehicles, cooking. I think I ran the dryer right here, which is when I see the biggest spike, especially if I'm also charging an EV at the same time. And then heat pumps are really taking over the heating load. So you can kind of see the base load is just sort of ramping up here as the heat pumps take over. And water heating is in there too in the sort of noise in this example. So that is a look at winter usage, and those heavy loads are really the ones that we need to think about when we're wondering about battery backup design. And so a Tesla Powerwall system is one of the systems that we install. We've installed hundreds. Um, and the default is that we actually put in a heavy loads panel, and that's where we put those heat pumps, the dryer, loads that you never want the battery to back up in case the power goes out in the middle of the night. Your heat pumps, you don't want to drain that battery too rapidly. That is where if you have a non-electric heating source, like a wood stove or a pellet stove or a gas stove or an old oil boiler, you can run that off the battery using a lot less electricity to run it. So that's one type of setup. The Franklin that Chuck has already talked about is our most common type of installation these days. One of the reasons is that it has this smart circuit module, and that enables heavy loads to turn off. So same setup, you have a heavy loads panel that automatically drops those heavy loads, but then from the Franklin app, you can actually turn those loads back on, which is really nice if it's a a summer outage or a shoulder season, and you do have plenty of solar recharge. You don't think it's going to be like a multi-day outage, and you want to run some of those heavy loads. you have that functionality, which is pretty handy. So, anybody know who this guy is with his Teslas? Um, I know I can't actually hear you, but I hope somebody guessed Bill Nye. We did not install Bill Nye's batteries, um, but you can see these are actually our sort of two most common places we're installing batteries now, which is either outside or in a garage, due to new fire codes that I'm going to get into in a second. And one of the great parts about the Efficiency Main program is that it really makes your second, third, fourth, however many batteries you're looking to install for the goal of duration of backup and number of loads that you want to back up. It makes each of those additional batteries after the first one about half off. The first battery has the additional transfer switch, the integration with the electrical system, the electrical work for heavy loads, etc. Connection to your solar array. There's a lot more that goes into your first battery and the controls, and then adding batteries after that is much easier and therefore a lower cost. So often people are sort of wondering between like one or two batteries, and this program does make it easier to choose a larger one because then you provide more value to the grid and you get a larger incentive back. As Chuck talked about, the other way to expand this battery capacity of the Franklin is with an EV or a manual generator that you can recharge the Franklin during an extended outage if your solar array is not providing enough recharge to what you are consuming. So I don't want to get too deep into the details of battery fire codes because I want to get to some questions here at the end, but suffice it to say that batteries being installed in basements is much harder with Maine fire code, Maine adopting the International Building Code. So you really have to have a fire rated room with smoke detection and drywall, and you're limited to two batteries when it's inside the home. If you're in an attached garage or detached outside the house, you can install 5 batteries, and there's less restrictions about the fire rating. Should be noted that the fire code is not because we're worried about the batteries themselves combusting and starting a fire. It is protecting the battery from a home fire to slow down the fire getting to the battery. These batteries are extremely safe, but if they are in a burning house for long enough, they will eventually combust, and that is, not a fire that fire departments want to deal with. So, really, where the battery fire codes are coming from. So, sort of to wrap up and get to some questions. Sam LaValle, our CFO, has a Franklin battery at his house. He's been participating in the first few events of this program, and providing backup power to his house during grid outages. And yeah, he's just been impressed at how flawless and seamless that process has been. So it's a sort of reminder that solar and batteries are a big piece of this electric energy transition. And I'm going to try not to spend too much time on this slide with far too much text. But with my background in economics, I really like remembering that when you have a traditional home with, in this case, a propane heat and hot water system and a $210 a month electric bill, assuming some increase in pricing over the next 25 years due to inflation. It's actually more dramatic these days for energy costs, and the war in Iran is certainly exacerbating that problem. You spend a lot on energy bills. You also spend some propane in this example for fuel for your generator. And then there's ongoing maintenance costs. Um, a little aside is that we're actually set to install 14 Franklin batteries, one in each unit at a new development instead of the generators they had planned there, because their experience with generators at their other units has been that unfortunately they've only lasted about 7 years, and they're costing about $500 a year in annual maintenance and upkeep costs. So the Franklin battery is looking very compelling compared to their experience with generators. And they have some electric um, trucks. And so we're going to install a input for manual charging of that battery in the case that the single Franklin battery doesn't last as long as they need. So just a sort of interesting example from the real world that we're dealing with right now. So anyway, this big stack bar graph is about $360,000 over 25 years, which works out to be, over $1,000 per month in energy costs over that time, compared to a home that invests in electrification and a solar project to power it. Um, that is under 100 grand, and then a little bit of remaining electricity costs that in this example, is about $50 a month on average over 25 years. So I hope I didn't put anybody to sleep here at the end, and we can get to a few questions. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you. And I know a lot of this was Maine specific. I do want to note there are people in Massachusetts and New Hampshire on the call, and I've been frantically talking with our sales managers in those states to answer questions. If we didn't get to them, I will continue to reach out to people with those answers. So you did address fire code requirements in Maine. Thomas, do you want to comment on other states? I think they're very, very similar, if not identical.
Yeah, they're the same. Yeah, the
Great.
other Massachusetts and New Hampshire have been following that fire code for longer than Maine, so it's a new thing for Maine, but it's not for Massachusetts and New Hampshire, which basically means that batteries go in. Let me turn off my laser pointer. Batteries go in garages and on the exterior as the default.
Mhm. And how long do home batteries last? I know you mentioned generators with the experience, but and what weakens them?
If you're talking about life cycle of a battery,
Mm,
most batteries have at least a 10-year warranty. The Franklin boasts what they say is the industry leading warranty, which is 15 years and 60,000 kilowatt hours through the battery. I guess it's 15 years or 60,000 kilowatt hours, 60 megawatt hours. Um, so it's really designed for participation in VPP programs like this. Uh, but yeah, they're 10 plus year warranties, which what we know from electric vehicle batteries and other batteries out there in the market is that they last a long time. They're just output slowly degrades over time. So
mhm.
that's where these warranties will protect you against that degradation. Um, but we expect them to last, yeah, 15, 20 plus years. And really, it becomes a question of um, when do you upgrade that battery? When is the capacity degraded enough that it's not as large as you want anymore? Um, there's also exciting things, thinking about all these electric vehicles and their sort of second life. There's already some of this happening where they're recycling or repurposing electric vehicle batteries and turning them into grid scale batteries, because you sort of less capacity and yeah, it's not as energy dense a need as an electric vehicle, so you can repurpose those.
Great. Another question about batteries, and we have some EV ones for you, Chuck. If the grid goes down and no one is home, is there a way to automatically switch from grid to battery power? And I think the answer is it does it seamlessly because when I'm home, it does it seamlessly. True?
Yeah, exactly. If you have a standby battery installed, that is one of the big benefits is that it flips over automatically in really less than a second. So a lot of homeowners don't know that the grid has actually gone down, except that they get a notification on their phone. Um, that is, better than a generator, which takes some number of seconds, sometimes 60, sometimes 90, um, as it has to, crank up and do its thing. Um, I think I answered the question.
Yes, you did. Thanks.
Al- Also an advantage over like the EV vehicle to home systems, if you're not home and the grid goes down, your EV is probably not there either. So, again, one of the advantages of one of these built-in standby batteries we've been talking about.
Great. Chuck, Ford vehicle to home, does it only work with Sunrun integrated systems?
That is correct, with the caveat that Ford has discontinued that system. They're no longer selling it, and I heard that they're actually not supporting it anymore either. So that is the only option. I think Ford is transitioning to more of a vehicle to load just through a transfer switch instead of that whole integrated system.
I think
We
I,
did install one of those Ford Sys bidirectional systems for Bill Coop, one of our co-founders of Vision Energy. Um, it was a very frustrating install. It is, multiple different manufacturers' equipment trying to work together, and it did not work. It took a lot of extra work to try to get that system to work. That experience and the support or lack of support led us to not offer that system for other homeowners. And yeah, the news that Chuck is sharing about how it's not being supported is yeah, one of those things where we're glad we didn't roll that out to more customers, even though there was and there is demand for that type of system. But as Chuck explained really well, there's just a lot of complexity and not a great system out there that we have seen, and it is still very manufacturer specific. So um, though the bidirectional vehicle to home has been talked about for a long time and seems like a good idea at a simple level, I think it's still, as we talked about today, there's a lot of reasons to not rely on that technology for your home.
few questions have involved SIG energy. So thoughts on SIG energy and the DC coupled charger?
Yeah, I saw there's a question too about like a universal
Mhm.
interface, and I think that's kind of related to this. That's a specific company that's working on it. There are a number of companies that are working on a more universal kind of bidirectional charger. Um, as far as I've known, most of those are European. I just looked up SIG Energy real quickly, and it looks like that's only CCS2, which is just a European standard. We don't have that in the US right now. Not to say that it might not come here eventually, but, I think based on the way that we handle interconnection in this country and our national electric code and things like that, it presents some different challenges. So I've heard that there are companies that are working on that. There's still not a marketable product that you can get in the US right now that makes that possible and truly universal, with any vehicle. Hopefully in the future it would, but right now that's not an option.
Two more questions. I love this one. As a farmer and a rural Mainer, I have a 2017 Nissan Leaf with a 30 kilowatt battery. Can used EV batteries that are being retired be replaced for home backup use? I love this question.
Um, I suppose there are kind of uh, intrepid people doing that and figuring out how to do that. It would require some pretty sophisticated electrical knowledge, especially to do it safely. Um, I will say though that there's been, we're finally getting to the point now where there are enough EV batteries that are old enough to build this kind of market. I read something, I think Colorado just signed a law that like the manufacturers are actually responsible for properly disposing or reusing the battery at the end of the vehicle's lifetime. So, as there are more and more of these batteries that are aged enough that they could be repurposed, I think we'll see that market build up. Um, right now, again, there are no like consumer products available for that, but there are um, groups that are doing that. I think there was one in California that took a bunch of old Nissan Leaf batteries and built it into a giant grid support battery, full of like shipping containers full of them. So the industry is building up as we have enough of a supply of those old batteries coming around.
Great. And we're going to wrap at 1 o'clock. I see there's some questions from some solar champions, and I will get you with your salesperson to answer those questions. And anyone who didn't, I put in our chat, our email address, hello@revisionenergy.com, as well as contact information for our form if you're interested in getting a free site assessment of battery and solar potential at your home. So thank you, Chuck. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, everyone who joined us today, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot.